"You're not coming upstairs," Ashley hissed. Before I could respond, my sister grabbed my wrist and shoved me hard. So hard my back hit the cold concrete wall of the basement. "Ashley, what are you doing? I'm your sister," I gasped, stunned, my voice echoing down the stairwell. The door slammed, the lock clicked, and just like that, I was trapped. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us where are you from and from which city you're watching our videos. And after watching the whole video, don't forget to tell us what would you do in this situation. Be honest. Tell me in the comments below. We read every comment. Let's begin. I stood frozen, barefoot on the dusty cement floor, my hands trembling. The pale dress I'd ironed the night before was now smudged from the wall. From the tiny window above, I could hear laughter, the click of heels, the rustling of satin dresses. Ashley's wedding was happening just 20 feet above me. I was never meant to be part of it. "You're not pretty enough to be seen today," she'd said earlier while curling her hair in the bridal suite. "I don't want you standing next to me in pictures. You'll ruin them." I thought she was just being cruel in her usual passive-aggressive way. I didn't think she'd actually lock me away. The basement reeked of mildew and forgotten furniture. I tried to call someone. My phone wasn't in my purse. It must have fallen out in the chaos. Tears stung my eyes, not from the insult. I'd gotten used to Ashley's venom over the years, but from the sharp humiliation of being discarded. I was 27, I paid my own rent, I worked 2 jobs to survive. And yet, here I was, treated like trash in my own family. The worst part? I had no one here. My husband, Mason, was supposed to come later. He had a last-minute client emergency and said he'd try to make it before the cake cutting. I had texted him earlier. "Don't worry, it's just a wedding. See you later." God, if only I had told him what Ashley said. The lights flickered. I sat down on an overturned laundry basket and pulled my knees in tight. Then, I heard a voice. "No, where's my wife?" It echoed through the house. It was Mason. I jolted to my feet. I said, "Where is she?" He shouted. My heart pounded. I ran to the door and banged hard. "Mason!" Footsteps thundered overhead. Fast, furious. Then, boom! The door burst open. And there he was. Mason, eyes blazing, jaw clenched, breathing hard, like he'd just run through fire to get to me. Behind him, I saw my mother's horrified face and the groomsmen staring. He didn't say a word. He just walked over, took one look at me, and lifted me into his arms. My dusty dress, my bare feet, my messy hair. He didn't care. "You locked her in a basement for a photo?" he growled, turning to Ashley, who had just come down in her lace-covered gown. Ashley opened her mouth to speak, but the photographer, silent until now, raised his camera. Click! The flash lit up the moment Mason carried me up the stairs. The entire room froze, except the lens, which turned away from the bride and toward me. I sat in the passenger seat of Mason's car, still barefoot, still shaking. We had driven in silence for 10 minutes before he finally spoke. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked quietly, eyes fixed on the road. I didn't know how to answer. Because it felt normal? Because Ashley had always done things like this, and somehow I'd convinced myself I deserved it? "She told me I'd ruin the wedding photos," I said, voice barely above a whisper. Mason's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "And your mother let her do that?" I looked out the window. My mom just said, "Try not to make this about you." That was her go-to phrase. She used it when I cried as a kid, when Ashley shoved me in high school, when I worked 2 jobs to pay for college and couldn't afford to fly home for holidays. Mason pulled into a gas station and parked. "I need to know," he said, turning toward me. "Is this how they always treat you?" I felt exposed, raw, like I'd been caught hiding bruises I didn't even realize I had. I nodded. Mason sat back in his seat and exhaled slowly. "Not anymore. Not anymore." We drove home to our small townhouse in Silverwood. Mason ran me a bath, ordered dinner, and didn't ask any more questions that night. He just sat beside me and held my hand like he was afraid I'd slip away. But something had changed, not just in Mason, in me. The next morning, I woke up to my phone vibrating. It was buzzing with notifications, messages, missed calls. I frowned. My cousin Leah. "Girl, you're trending on TikTok." My heart dropped. I clicked the link she sent. There it was, the clip. Me in Mason's arms. Ashley's face frozen in shock. The moment the photographer's camera turned. Someone had recorded it from their phone. It had a caption: "When the bride locks her sister in a basement and her husband shows up like a movie hero." Over 4 million views. I blinked in disbelief. A second clip showed Ashley screeching at the photographer, "Delete that picture," and him replying calmly, "No." That was the only real moment of the day. Thousands of comments, strangers defending me, calling out Ashley, praising Mason. Then, another message came in, from someone I never expected. My biological father, the one who left when I was 8, the one no one ever talked about. He wrote, "Saw the video. I have something you need to know. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen, something twisted in my stomach, because deep down, I already knew. Everything in my life, every cruel word, every cold shoulder, every locked door was about more than just jealousy. It was about who I was. And they had spent my whole life making sure I never found out. Mason was still asleep when I stepped onto the porch with a blanket wrapped around me and my phone clutched in my hand. I stared at the message from my biological father, David Kessler. That name hadn't been spoken in our household in nearly 2 decades. My mother used to refer to him only as the mistake I erased. I tapped out a shaky reply. "What do you want to tell me?" The response came instantly. "Meet me, 4 p.m., Cafe Linden, alone." I didn't tell Mason, not yet. Some answers. You just have to face alone. Cafe Linden was quiet when I arrived. I recognized him immediately, even through the years. His face was aged, lined with regret. He stood as I approached, his eyes searching mine. "Alina," he said, "you look just like her." "Who?" I asked, heart racing. He motioned to the chair. I sat, arms crossed, every cell in my body defensive. "Your real mother," he said quietly, "not the woman who raised you." My heart stopped. "What are you talking about?" I asked, stunned. "My mom is your aunt," he interrupted gently. "Your mother, my wife, died giving birth to you. Her sister, Ashley's mom, took you in when I broke down. I wasn't in my right mind. And she made me believe it was best, that you'd grow up safe. But they didn't keep you safe, Alina." My blood ran cold. He pulled something from his coat pocket and slid it across the table, a photograph of a younger woman, soft eyes, auburn curls, holding a baby, me. "I never wanted to disappear," he said, voice cracking, "but they made sure I stayed away." Everything started clicking. Why I was always treated like an outsider, why my mother was cold and my sister cruel, because I was never meant to be in that house. I wasn't their daughter. I was their secret. I returned home in a daze. Mason was waiting, pacing in the hallway. "Where were you?" he asked. "You disappeared on me." I walked right up to him, dropped the photo into his hand, and said, "That woman. That's my mother." He stared at it, then looked at me. "What do you mean?" So I told him everything, every word, every breath, every lie. And when I finished, he whispered, "They locked you in that basement because you're a threat to their picture-perfect lie." I nodded, tears in my eyes. But not anymore. That night, Mason uploaded a high-res version of the photo the wedding photographer had sent us privately, the one of him carrying me while everyone else stood frozen. He captioned it, "Not every fairy tale starts in a ballroom. Sometimes it begins in a basement." It went viral within hours. But what came next wasn't a fairy tale. Ashley's husband's family saw the video and began asking questions. The wedding photographer gave an interview. My mother called me nonstop, leaving voicemails that grew more and more desperate. Until finally, my lawyer called. "You need to come in. There's something about your inheritance, your biological mother's estate. It's been contested for years." I blinked. "My mother had an estate?" "Not just an estate," he replied. "She had a legacy, and now it's yours." The final photo wasn't the one Ashley posed for in her white gown. It was me, standing in front of a courthouse, holding the keys to a house I never knew I owned, with my husband by my side. And this time, the camera was exactly where it should have been. The drive to the estate felt like entering another world. Tucked behind a gated driveway in the hills of Vermont, the house loomed like something from an old movie. Elegant, timeless, weathered by secrets. The lawyer handed me the keys and said, "She left everything in your name. The land, the house, and the letters." "Letters?" I asked. He nodded. They're in the study. She wrote one every year until she died. They were never mailed. Mason and I stepped through the front doors, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. Everything smelled of old wood and lavender. There were portraits of her, my real mother, on the walls, framed in gold. A piano sat untouched in the corner. In the study, tucked inside a cedar box, I found the first letter. My sweet Alina. If you're reading this, it means you found your way back to me. I prayed you would. I know you'll have questions. I know life wasn't easy for you. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from what they became. I sank to the floor as Mason kneeled beside me, his arms around my shoulders. Each letter peeled back more truth. My mother had built this home with love. She was an artist, a philanthropist, and quietly one of the largest donors to women's shelters across New England. She had built this life for me, and it had been stolen. Stolen by people who locked me in basements, who told me I wasn't pretty enough, who looked at me and only saw the shame of their choices. I stayed in the house for 3 days. By the fourth, news had broken. A journalist picked up the viral wedding story and followed the trail to the estate. A full exposé was written. How a woman grew up in a family that never told her the truth. The public turned. Ashley was bombarded online. Her new in-laws, embarrassed by the scandal, announced an annulment. As for my mother, my aunt, she finally called again. I let it ring. Then I answered. Alina, she breathed, you have to make this stop. You're destroying everything. No, I said calmly. I'm just finally showing the world what you tried to bury. You're making us look like monsters. I laughed, quiet, bitter. You locked your niece in a basement because she might ruin a picture. You did that without flinching. Silence. I want to make it right, she finally said. We're family. You only say that now because I have the house, the name. The truth, I hung up. Mason walked in with a cup of coffee. You okay? I nodded. I'm done hiding. He smiled and leaned down to kiss my forehead. Then it's time the world sees you. That weekend, we hosted a charity gala at the estate in honor of my mother, for women who had been silenced, discarded, overlooked. I stood in front of that crowd, shaking, nervous, vulnerable, and I told them everything. How I was locked away, how I was told I wasn't good enough, how I found my name in a letter written by the woman who gave me life. The crowd stood and applauded, but one person in the back stood frozen, Ashley. She looked smaller somehow, like the truth had finally caved in on her. And then, for the first time, she walked out, without a camera pointed at her. The spotlight no longer belonged to her. It belonged to me. The night after the gala, I stood barefoot on the marble steps of the estate, gazing out into the moonlit garden that once belonged to a woman I never got to meet, but who somehow knew me better than anyone else ever had. The whispers of applause still echoed in my ears. But what stuck with me most were the women who came up to me after I spoke. I felt invisible too. My sister said the same words to me before my wedding. You made me feel seen. I wasn't the only one who'd been locked in a metaphorical basement. I had just been the one foolish enough to think I had to stay there. 3 days later, I received a manila envelope at the estate's front gate. No name, no return address. Inside it were 2 things. 1, a photo, an old one, from my 12th birthday. I was off to the side of the frame, blowing out candles alone while Ashley and her friends smiled for the camera near the cake. 2, a typed letter. You were always brighter. We just didn't want the world to notice. We thought if we broke you down first, you'd never rise higher than us. Guess we were wrong. Anonymous. The paper trembled in my hand. It wasn't signed, but I didn't need it to be. I knew exactly who sent it. That was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever get. That week, I made the final decision. I hired an investigative attorney and had all estate documents reviewed. Turns out there had been a quiet attempt years ago by Ashley and my mother to contest the will of my real mom. They'd tried to sell off the property illegally, but were blocked. I had grounds, serious ones. But instead of pressing charges, I called a press conference. When the media arrived, I stood on the front steps and spoke from my gut. I won't press charges, but I will protect what was given to me. I will honor the woman who gave me life, and I will not allow the people who silenced me to rewrite this story again. That speech aired across national outlets. I didn't care about the fame. I cared about the impact, and impact it had. Foundations reached out, universities, women's groups, even publishing houses. Suddenly, I was the story, the girl who'd been hidden away. Now standing in the light, 6 months passed. The estate had been restored to its original beauty. I kept my mother's study untouched, except for one new addition: a framed photo on the wall. Mason carrying me out of that basement. Below it, a small gold plaque: "Never again unseen." That fall, I walked into a bookstore in downtown Boston. My memoir had just been released. Title: Locked In, Let Out. It sat front and center on a wooden display. As I stared at the cover, a familiar voice whispered from behind me. "I finished it in one sitting." I turned. Ashley stood there in a beige coat, dark circles under her eyes, no cameras, no filters. For the first time in years, she looked real. "You ruined us," she said softly. I met her eyes, calm, steady, no anger left. "No," I replied. "You ruined yourselves. I just stopped letting you do it to me." She didn't respond. She turned, walked out the door, and melted into the crowd. And I never saw her again. That night, I returned home. My home. Mason was in the kitchen, laughing at something on his phone. "What's so funny?" I asked, kicking off my heels. He held up the screen. A wedding photographer had posted a throwback on his page. The caption read, "Still the most powerful moment I've ever captured. A man kicking down a door for the woman they tried to bury." The photo was framed in black and white, my hair a mess, my eyes swollen. But I had never looked more alive. Mason looked at me and smiled. "You know, you never needed the camera turned toward you." I tilted my head. "Why's that?" "Because when people finally saw you, they couldn't look away." I walked over and wrapped my arms around him, and this time, no one would ever lock me away again.
"You're not even invited. You embarrass us." My father's voice pierced the air, loud enough to stop conversations and turn heads. I stood at the front gate of the estate, holding the pie I'd baked, trembling like a leaf in the wind. The cold November breeze nipped at my cheeks, but nothing stung more than his words. My hands clenched the ceramic dish tighter, the heat long gone. From behind him, my mother appeared in her burgundy shawl, her eyes darting between guests and the gravel driveway. She didn't meet my eyes. Instead, she looked down and whispered, "Just leave quietly." That was it. That was all I got. No embrace. No defense. No ounce of warmth from the woman who once held my hair back when I was sick. But then, a heavy thud shook the table under the tent. Silverware rattled, glasses trembled, and all heads turned. "That's enough." The voice boomed like thunder. My grandfather, Edward Langston, the man whose approval this entire family lived and died for, rose from his chair with a fire in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. His hand still rested flat on the wooden table he'd just slammed, his gold wedding band catching the overhead lights. He looked at me, not with pity, not with shame, but with something close to pride. "You don't speak to her like that," he said sharply to my father. "Not after what you did." Gasps. My Uncle David spilled wine on his tie. My Aunt Margaret blinked like her world was tilting. My father's face drained. "Dad, don't start this." But Grandpa Edward was already walking. Not fast, but with the slow, shaking certainty of a man who had carried truths for far too long. He stopped in front of me. "Come inside, Olivia," he said. "You're not just invited, you belong here more than any of them." The world tilted again, but this time in my direction. My hands trembled, still clutching the pie dish like a shield. "Why now?" I asked softly, tears building. He exhaled through his nose. "Because silence has cost you too much already. And they're about to learn what it's cost me." He turned toward the crowd. "You want a gathering? Let's gather around the truth. Because I'm tired of the lies that built this table." And with that he asked me to follow him. I did. My heels clicked on the flagstone path, past the stunned faces of relatives who once ignored my birthday, past cousins who whispered I was the family dropout, past the judgmental stares of people who never really knew me. Inside, by the fireplace, he pulled a faded envelope from his coat pocket. My mother stepped in behind him, looking as pale as porcelain. My father looked like he wanted to disappear into the hardwood floor. "I didn't raise my son to be this cold," Grandpa said, staring at my father. "But I'm done punishing Olivia for his choices. Because what none of you know is..." He stopped. His hand shook slightly as he held the envelope. Then he looked at me. "This is about you now. You decide who gets to hear it." I stood there, my throat tight, every childhood humiliation clawing at my ribs. The pie dish was still in my hands. I gently placed it down on the side table, stood straighter and said, "Read it." And that's when everything began to unravel. My grandfather's hands trembled slightly as he opened the envelope. The seal brittle, like it had waited years to finally break. The room was so quiet you could hear the firewood shift in the hearth. My relatives were frozen just inside the doorway, unsure whether to stay or leave, but unable to look away. He unfolded the papers and cleared his throat, his voice gruff and low. 31 years ago I made a decision I've regretted every day since. A decision to protect the image of this family, at the cost of someone who never deserved the punishment. My father stepped forward. "Dad, enough. Don't drag old stories into this." Grandpa turned sharply, his voice cracking like a whip. "You dragged it, son. The day you told Olivia's mother you'd handle things. The day you lied to this entire family about what really happened." He looked back at me. My breath caught in my throat. "Olivia is not some outsider we tolerate out of obligation. She's the only rightful heir to this family's legacy." Gasps. Whispers erupted like wildfire. "What does he mean, heir? Is this about the trust fund? She's not even in the will, is she?" My Aunt Margaret stood up. "Dad, are you saying she's the primary beneficiary?" He nodded solemnly. "Yes. Olivia was always meant to inherit the Langston estate. Not because she earned it, though Lord knows she has, but because it was her birthright. Your father," he pointed to my dad, "hid the original amendment to my will. Replaced it with a draft that left her out entirely." My knees nearly buckled. "Why?" I asked, staring at my father. "Why would you erase me like that?" He opened his mouth but no sound came out. His eyes flared, then dropped to the floor. Cowardice in its purest form. Grandpa turned to the others. "You all called her a dropout. Lazy. Irresponsible. But did any of you know that she worked 2 jobs to keep her mother's medical bills paid? That she gave up college because her scholarship required family cosigners, and none of you," he scanned the room, "lifted a single pen?" My mother sat down suddenly as if her legs gave out beneath the weight of it all. "I asked her to leave quietly," she whispered, broken, "because I didn't want the fighting to ruin today." I looked at her, eyes stinging. "You watched them humiliate me every time and never said a word. Why now?" She didn't answer. Grandpa took a step forward and handed me the papers. "This is the real will. Notarized. Legal. Effective. You own the Langston property now. And everything that comes with it. The family business. The house. The name." I looked down at it. My hands trembled, not from excitement, but from disbelief. Grief. Bigger. The same people who laughed at me just moments ago now looked at me like I was a stranger holding their future. "What you do next is up to you," Grandpa said. "You can burn it all down. Or build something better. But don't let them write your story anymore." I glanced at my father, who still hadn't said a word. I looked at the crowd that had always pushed me to the edge. And for the first time, I felt power in my silence. The weight of the document in my hands was crushing. Every signature, every notarized stamp, every page etched with the name Olivia Langston confirmed what I had never dared to believe. I wasn't an embarrassment. I was the future of this family. I looked up slowly, feeling the atmosphere shift. The whispers had grown teeth. Jealousy, disbelief, and panic hung in the air like fog. Then came the voice I expected, sharp, bitter, and desperate. "You can't just hand her everything." My cousin Brad, the golden boy, the next in line, the one who once stuffed my shoes with shaving cream during Christmas because I walked weird, stepped forward. "I gave up a job in New York because I thought I was taking over the family business. I've worked my ass off for this family, Grandpa." Grandpa's expression didn't budge. "You worked for a title. Olivia worked for survival." Brad scoffed, pacing. "She's not even, she dropped out. She's just some waitress with a second-hand car and a podcast no one listens to." That one hurt. I had poured every ounce of myself into that podcast. Late nights. Unpaid interviews. Borrowed mics. I had built a small, loyal following who believed in truth and raw honesty, things my own family refused to value. I stepped forward. "You think what I do is worthless because it doesn't benefit you." He sneered. "No. I think it's pathetic that you're standing here acting like you belong, just because Grandpa got soft in his old age." That's when I felt it. the heat rising in my chest. Not embarrassment this time. Rage. You bullied me for years, I said calmly. All of you did. Mocked my clothes, my choices, my voice. And now that I have something you want, suddenly I'm worth noticing? No one replied. I turned to Grandpa. Is it true? I control everything now. He nodded, eyes steady. It's all yours. Legally and ethically. What you do next is your legacy. I scanned the room. Familiar faces. Fake smiles. And some stunned silence. Then I made my first decision. Everyone who ever voted to cut me out of this family, I want your keys to the property on my desk by Monday. Gasps again. Brad started to protest, but I cut him off. Don't worry. I won't make you work for someone you think is beneath you. Then I added, eyes locked on my father. But if you want a seat at the table, you're going to have to earn it. The same way I did. My father's mouth twitched like he might finally speak. Then he simply sat down. Defeated. Maybe ashamed. Maybe just tired of hiding. And that's when I knew. It was over. Not the pain. Not the journey. But the chapter where I stood outside the gate, pie in hand, hoping for someone to let me in. Now, they would wait for me to open the door. The next morning the estate felt different. I stood barefoot in the study, my study now, surrounded by walls of old books and echoes of conversations I was never meant to hear. Light filtered through stained glass windows, soft and golden. The same room that once belonged to my grandfather now belonged to me. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt exposed. Taking over the Langston legacy sounded grand when my name was still a whisper in this house. But now it was stitched into every legal document, whispered through family group chats, and etched into the marble plaque at the office entrance downtown. The phone hadn't stopped buzzing all morning. Voicemails from concerned uncles, emails from financial advisors I hadn't appointed, and 3 separate requests from Brad to talk privately. And then came a knock at the door. I opened it to find my mother standing there. No makeup. No performance. Can I come in? I hesitated but stepped aside. She walked slowly, eyes grazing over the study like she hadn't been inside for years. Your grandfather was always a fortress, she whispered. But he had a soft spot for you. I should have seen it coming. I folded my arms. But you didn't. You looked away. Every single time. She turned to face me, finally meeting my eyes. I was scared. Of him. Or of what it would mean to protect me. Her silence answered both. You used to be proud of me, I said quietly. Remember the first time I sang on stage? You cried. She smiled faintly. You wore that yellow dress with the crooked hemline. You were glowing. I blinked quickly, fighting back tears. I didn't want this conversation to confuse me. I didn't want to remember soft things. Because she wasn't soft when they laughed at me. She wasn't soft when she whispered, just leave quietly. Why didn't you stand up for me? She swallowed hard. Because your father told me it was better to keep the family from falling apart. He said you were strong enough to take it. I laughed bitterly. I was never supposed to take it. I was supposed to be protected. She nodded. Fully. Then from her purse she pulled out an old cassette tape. This was recorded the day you were born. Your grandfather, he made this for you. I took it gently, fingers tracing the worn plastic. It was labeled in faded ink. Olivia. Day 1. He knew they wouldn't love you the way he did, she said. But he believed one day, you'd fight your way back to where you belonged. I sat down in the old leather chair, the cassette in my lap, my throat tight. It shouldn't have taken 31 years, I whispered. She nodded again. This time with a tear slipping down her cheek. No. It shouldn't have. And for once, she didn't try to fix it. She just sat beside me quiet. That night I played the tape. And I listened as a younger version of my grandfather spoke softly into a recorder. Olivia, you don't know this yet. But one day you're going to remind this family what it means to feel. To fight. To forgive. And when you do, don't let them shrink you again. I sat alone in the dark, hands clasped tightly, and let myself cry. Not because I was weak. But because I was finally allowed to. The air inside Langston Manor was different now. Heavier. Not with tension but with purpose. For the first time in over 3 decades, the estate's grand halls no longer echoed with condescension or cold formality. They breathed. They hummed with a shift so deep, It had begun to rattle the bones of everyone who once walked these halls thinking their power was permanent. I stood at the top of the winding staircase, overlooking the front atrium where a sea of unfamiliar faces had gathered: lawyers, board members, employees from the family business, even reporters who waited silently beyond the wrought iron gates. All of them here not because of Edward Langston or William Langston but because of me, Olivia Langston. The girl they once refused to acknowledge. The woman they now had no choice but to face. I took a deep breath, my heels echoing on the wood as I descended the steps. Each footfall was deliberate. Measured. I wasn't the outsider anymore. I was the heir, the owner, and the leader of a legacy they tried to write me out of. As I entered the room, every conversation died. Heads turned. Some stood. Some didn't. And then, my father, William Langston, standing stiffly near the fireplace, jaw tight, arms crossed. I walked past him without flinching. Because today wasn't about him. Today was about drawing a new line in the soil of a family that had rotted from the inside. And planting something new. I turned to face them all. You all know why you're here, I said calmly but with authority. The Langston Foundation is being restructured. Effective immediately. Brad, arms folded, immediately scoffed. So that's it? You sweep in after decades of doing nothing and just take control. I smiled. Composed. I didn't do nothing. I survived all of you. A murmur rippled through the room. You ran this family like a private club, I continued. Only those who followed the rules, kissed the rings, and kept quiet got access. But no more. The foundation moving forward will fund underrepresented students. The family trust will be audited. The business, I turned to the financial advisor, will be evaluated for corruption and backdoor dealings. Brad went pale. So did my uncle. My father finally shifted, clearly growing anxious. You're digging up skeletons, Olivia, he said. I'm airing them out, I replied. Because I refuse to inherit silence. Then I walked across the room and placed a thick file on the table in front of the board. These are testimonies. From former staff members. People who were fired, silenced, or bullied under your watch. I invited them here today too. Because if you're going to rebuild something meaningful, you start with the people you buried first. At that, the side doors opened and in walked 4 former employees. One of them was Mrs. Winslow, the housekeeper who raised me when my parents forgot I existed. She looked older but proud. She smiled at me with a quiet nod. I felt my throat tighten. My father's face? White as paper. This is a witch hunt, he spat. I stepped closer. No. This is justice. Then I turned to him, my voice low but firm. You cut me out of every holiday. You whispered lies into this family's ears for years. And when I came back to the front gate with nothing but a pie and an ounce of hope, you told me I embarrassed you. I paused. But the truth is, I reflect everything you tried to suppress. And that's why you hated me. He opened his mouth but there were no words. Only the sound of his breath, shallow and furious. I stepped back. You are no longer allowed on Langston property without written permission. And your voting rights on the board are suspended, pending investigation. My mother gasped. Olivia. I turned to her gentler. You're welcome to stay. But if you ever ask me to leave quietly again, I'll make sure you're the one standing outside the gate. She looked down. Didn't argue. After the meeting ended, people trickled out slowly, some in silence, some whispering. Brad left with clenched fists. My uncle refused to look at me. But I didn't care. Because in the back of the room, Grandpa sat in his chair by the fireplace, nodding, his expression quiet but full of pride. As the sun began to set, casting golden light through the tall windows, I joined him. We didn't say much. After a while he reached over and held my hand. You did it, he murmured. You reminded them. Of what? I asked. He smiled. That the bloodline isn't the legacy. The courage is. Later that night I stood on the balcony alone, the wind brushing against my skin. Below, the manor lights glowed like a city in the dark. I thought about every time I cried myself to sleep in a 1-bedroom apartment, wondering if I mattered. Every time I walked by this estate too afraid to knock. No. I stood above it all. Not because I wanted revenge. But because I had finally remembered who I was. And now so had they.
The roar of applause shook the auditorium as names echoed across the stage.
Students beamed, families screamed with pride, cameras flashing like fireworks. I held my diploma tight, the paper trembling in my hands as I turned toward the crowd. Everyone had someone there. Everyone. Except me. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us where are you from and from which city you're watching our videos. And after watching the whole video, don't forget to tell us, what would you do in this situation? Be honest, tell me in the comments below. We read every comment. Let's begin. The 2 seats my parents had reserved were empty, untouched, like they had never even considered coming. My heart dropped to the pit of my stomach. For weeks, I'd pictured them smiling, maybe even tearing up when they saw their daughter finally graduate. Instead, silence. Hours earlier, my mother's words had stung sharper than any blade. Claire, graduation's not that big of a deal. Your brother's promotion is more important. That's real success. Real success. And just like that, they were on a plane to Vegas, celebrating Nathan in a luxury suite while I crossed the stage alone. I forced a smile for the cameras, though my chest felt like it was caving in. That night, when my classmates filled social media with proud family selfies, my feed lit up with pictures of my brother in a neon-lit Vegas penthouse. Champagne towers, gold confetti raining down, my parents grinning ear to ear in designer outfits. The caption made my throat burn. So proud of our golden boy Nathan. This is what achievement looks like. My diploma sat on the counter, still in its cheap black folder, invisible next to their glossy photos. I locked myself in the bathroom and slid down to the floor, the glow of my phone burning into my skin. I wanted to scream, wanted to ask why wasn't I enough, but all that came out were quiet sobs. The door creaked open. Eric knelt beside me, his hand gentle on my shoulder. "Claire," he whispered, his voice steady but sharp with anger. "You walked that stage. You earned every bit of this. Don't let them make you feel small." I shook my head, tears blurring my sight. "They didn't care. They'll never care." Eric tilted my chin up. His eyes burned with something fierce, something I didn't understand yet. "They'll care soon enough, because the day will come when they'll need you." I didn't know how right he was, until a week later, when my father's desperate voice broke through the line, shattering the silence of our kitchen. The call came on a Wednesday evening, just as I was setting dinner on the table. The smell of roasted chicken and herbs filled the kitchen, the clink of plates against the wood almost drowning out the sharp vibration of my phone. I glanced at the screen. Dad. For a moment, I froze. My father never called unless it was about Nathan, unless there was some comparison to remind me of how I'd fallen short. My first instinct was to let it ring, but Eric reached across the table, picked it up, and pressed it into my palm. "Answer it," he said, his voice calm but firm. "This isn't the time to hide." I hesitated, then pressed the green button. "Hello?" On the other end, my father's voice was low and ragged, nothing like the confident man who dismissed my graduation just days ago. "Claire." His breath hitched. "We're in trouble." The words caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" He cleared his throat, but his tone cracked like glass under pressure. "The mortgage. We fell behind. The bank's threatening foreclosure. I need help." For a second, I couldn't even breathe. My parents, who had flown to Vegas for Nathan's party, who had called my graduation worthless, were calling me now, begging. I bit my lips so hard it almost bled. "And what exactly do you expect me to do?" My voice shook, half with anger, half with disbelief. "Claire, you have a good job. You're stable. We thought maybe you could lend us..." "Stable?" I cut him off, my voice rising despite myself. "You skipped my graduation to party in Vegas, Dad. You didn't even clap for me when I walked that stage. But now I'm supposed to save you?" The silence on the line was deafening. For the first time in my life, Richard Carter had no comeback. No lecture. Just silence. Then Eric stepped closer, his hand brushing mine. He nodded, silently asking for the phone. I gave it to him, my heart hammering in my chest. Eric pressed it to his ear. His tone was calm, but it carried a steel edge I'd never heard before. "Richard, listen carefully," he said. "You don't need to call Claire for help with the mortgage." My father's voice came through, shaky, desperate. "Eric, please. We're losing the house. If you two don't step in, we'll have nowhere to go." Eric's lips curved into something sharp, almost cruel, though his voice stayed level. "Then I suggest you call the new owner." There was a pause. Confusion laced my father's tone. What are you talking about?" Eric leaned back against the counter, his eyes locked on mine. He took his time, savoring every word before delivering the blow. "Her name's on the deed. You're speaking to the daughter you dismissed. Claire owns that house now." I covered my mouth, stunned. My knees nearly gave out. I had no idea Eric had gone through with it already. We'd talked about investing, about the possibility of buying the property my parents were mishandling. But I didn't know he had finalized it. On the other end, my father's voice cracked like thunder before a storm. "No, that's impossible. The Carter house has been ours for generations." Eric's gaze hardened. "Not anymore. Maybe you should have thought about generations when you told your daughter her graduation was meaningless." The line went dead silent. I could almost picture my father standing in the living room, his face drained of color, my mother's gasp echoing in the background. For once, they weren't holding champagne flutes or snapping pictures of Nathan. They were standing in a house that no longer belonged to them. I stared at Eric, my pulse racing. You bought it? Without telling me?" His expression softened as he reached for my hand. "Claire, I couldn't stand by and let them keep treating you like nothing. You earned your degree. You've worked harder than anyone I know. They needed to understand that the girl they dismissed is the woman who now holds their future." Tears blurred my vision, but these weren't the same tears I'd cried in that bathroom after graduation. These were different. They were fierce, empowering. For the first time, I realized something. This wasn't revenge. This was justice. I took the phone back from Eric, hit redial, and when my father answered, his voice broken, I finally spoke the words I had swallowed for years. "Dad, you told me my graduation meant nothing. You told me Nathan's success was all that mattered. But now, you're living under my roof. And if you want to keep it, you'll have to start respecting me." There was no response, just the hollow sound of a man realizing his empire had crumbled at the hands of the daughter he'd overlooked. Eric squeezed my shoulder, whispering, "They wanted to define success. Now they get to live inside yours." I hung up, my heart pounding, knowing this was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of pounding on our apartment door. At first, I thought it was a neighbor, but when Eric opened it, my mother's voice tore through the hallway. "Claire, open this door right now." I froze halfway down the stairs, clutching the railing. There she was, Linda Carter, hair still perfectly styled, designer purse hanging off her arm, though her face was pale and desperate. Behind her, my father stood rigid, his jaw tight, eyes bloodshot like he hadn't slept. Eric didn't flinch. "This isn't your house anymore. You don't get to make demands here." My mother's eyes flicked to him, then back to me as I stepped forward. "Claire, please," she said, her voice trembling in a way I had never heard. We didn't know. We thought you were fine. We just wanted to be there for Nathan's big moment." I cut her off sharply. "My big moment was last week, Mom. I walked across that stage and you didn't even bother to show up." Her mouth opened and closed like she had no script to follow, no perfect excuse to hand me. My father finally spoke, his voice strained but still carrying that commanding edge. "Claire, whatever issues we've had, this isn't about that. This is about family. If you let the bank take that house, we'll have nothing." I stepped closer, my chest heaving, the anger I'd buried for years boiling over. "No, Dad, this is about that. All my life, it's been Nathan this, Nathan that. He was the golden boy, the chosen one. You never looked at me unless it was to compare me to him. And now, suddenly, when you're drowning, I'm supposed to save you?" Eric's hand rested lightly on my back, steadying me. "Claire," he whispered, "say what you need to say." I squared my shoulders and locked eyes with my father. "You're standing on the porch of the daughter you said was nothing. And the only reason you're here is because my name is on the deed. Not Nathan's, mine. The words landed like a hammer. My father's face flushed crimson, his hands curling into fists at his sides. You don't understand how this looks, Claire. People will find out. They'll know the house isn't ours anymore. What will they think? I laughed bitterly. So that's what you're worried about? Appearances? Not the fact that you've treated me like an outsider in my own family for years. My mother finally broke down, her mascara smudging as tears spilled over. Claire, please. We can't lose the house. Your brother's been trying, but he doesn't have the means. You're the only one who can help us. That word, help, echoed in my ears. Help? When had they ever helped me? When I stayed up nights studying while they flew out to cheer Nathan's basketball games? When I paid my own way through school because Nathan needed more support? When I walked across that stage alone while they were posting party pictures in Vegas? No, I said flatly. You didn't need me then. You don't get to need me now. My father's eyes widened, his voice rising. You can't do this, Claire. We're your parents! Eric's voice sliced through the air, calm but merciless. You're right. You're her parents. But you forgot to treat her like your daughter. That's why we're here now. The silence that followed was suffocating. My mother sobbed quietly into her hands. My father stared at me, like if he glared hard enough I would back down. But I didn't. For the first time, I felt taller than him, stronger than the man who once made me feel so small. I stepped back toward the door. You should go, I said, my voice steady. Before the neighbors see you begging on my porch. My father's face twitched, pride warring with desperation. Finally, he grabbed my mother's arm and muttered, Come on. They turned and walked down the steps, their figures shrinking under the morning sun. Eric closed the door softly, then turned to me. His expression wasn't smug or triumphant, it was proud. You handled that better than I ever could have, but my chest still ached. I don't feel better, I feel guilty, angry, all of it mixed together. He cupped my face in his hands. That's normal. They raised you to believe their approval defined your worth, but today you showed them it doesn't. I leaned into him, my breath shaking. Do you think they'll come back? Eric's jaw tightened. Of course they will. Desperate people always come back. But next time, Claire, you'll be ready. I didn't know what scared me more, that he was right, or that deep down. Part of me wanted them to come back, just so I could remind them again of the truth they spent years denying. This wasn't the end. It was only the start of a reckoning they never saw coming. A week passed, but the tension never left me. Every ring of the phone, every knock on the door made my stomach tighten. I told myself I was done with them, that the confrontation on my porch was the closure I needed. But deep down, I knew my parents weren't finished, and I was right. Late Friday evening, just as Eric and I sat down for dinner, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a call. It was a message from Nathan. Claire, Mom, and Dad are losing it. They need to meet with you. Tonight. I stared at the text, heat rising in my chest. Nathan, the golden boy, the one they'd always chosen over me, was suddenly the messenger. Eric leaned over, reading the message with a sharp exhale. Of course, he muttered. When their empire crumbles, they send their favorite son to smooth it over. I didn't reply, but an hour later, headlights swept across our driveway. My parents stepped out of Nathan's sleek car, looking smaller than I'd ever seen them. Their designer clothes didn't hide the desperation in their eyes. I opened the door before they could knock. What do you want now? My mother's voice shook as she stepped forward. Claire, please let us explain. We made mistakes. Mistakes? I snapped, cutting her off. You made a lifetime of choices. You skipped my graduation to party in Vegas. You told me my brother's promotion mattered more than my degree. You humiliated me every chance you got. And now suddenly I'm supposed to save you? My father's tone hardened, though I could hear the crack beneath it. We're still your parents. Family forgives. I laughed, bitter and sharp. Family forgives when family cares. Tell me, Dad, when did you ever care about me? When did you ever once look at me without comparing me to Nathan? Nathan shifted uncomfortably beside them, his usual smugness gone. For the first time, he looked at me with something close to regret. Claire, they're scared. The bank's closing in. Without your help. Eric stepped into the doorway, his arm brushing mine. Nathan, you're missing the point. They're not scared of the bank. They're scared of the truth. For once, they don't hold the power. Claire does. My father's jaw clenched. Fine, you want honesty? Nathan was always the one we believed in because he seemed like the safe bet. He stopped himself, but the damage was done. My heart pounded as the years of silence, dismissal, and pain flashed before me. Because I didn't fit your picture of success? Because I wasn't the trophy child you could parade around? Guess what, Dad? You bet on the wrong child. The air went heavy. My mother reached out, her voice breaking. Claire, if we lose the house, we lose everything. Please, please don't let that happen. I stepped closer, my voice low but steady. You already lost everything the moment you made me feel like nothing. That house? It's mine now. And I get to decide what happens to it. My father's face drained of color. You wouldn't throw your own family out. I met his eyes, unblinking. You already did. Every time you chose Nathan over me, you pushed me out of this family. All I'm doing now is reminding you what that feels like. Behind me, Eric whispered, Claire, you don't owe them anything. And he was right. For the first time in my life, I felt free of their approval. Their begging, their excuses, their manipulations. It no longer had a hold on me. I straightened my shoulders. Here's the deal. You want to stay in that house? Then you treat me like a daughter, not a backup plan. No more dismissing me, no more comparing me. If you can't do that, you'll find out just how fast new owners can change the locks. My father's pride battled with his desperation. His lips trembled, but he finally nodded. My mother sobbed quietly, clutching his arm as if agreeing was the only way to survive. Nathan looked at me, shame clouding his eyes. For once, he didn't say a word. I stepped back, my voice calm now. You taught me that success meant titles, parties, and appearances. But tonight, you learned what real success looks like. It's standing here, owning what you tried to take from me. And I won't ever let you forget it. Eric closed the door slowly, leaving them standing on the porch, shadows under the porch light. I leaned against him, my chest heavy but alive with something I hadn't felt in years. Power. He kissed my forehead and whispered, You finally took back what was always yours. And as their footsteps faded into the night, I realized he was right. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing their approval. They were chasing mine.
The crash of the stainless steel tray against the counter nearly drowned out the impatient voice of the customer. Miss, I've been waiting for 20 minutes. Are you even listening? Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us where are you from and from which city you're watching our videos. And after watching the whole video, don't forget to tell us, what would you do in this situation? Be honest. Tell me in the comments below. We read every comment. Let's begin. I swallowed hard, forced a tired smile, and slid the plate across. My arms ached from carrying stacks of dishes all day. My back felt like it was on fire, and the sweat sticking to my uniform clung like glue. Double shifts at the diner weren't glamorous, but they paid the bills. At least they were supposed to. By the time I finally clocked out, the sky was dark. My shoes squished with sweat as I dragged myself down the block, just dreaming of unlocking the front door to my little house, showering off the grease smell, and collapsing into bed. But when I reached the street corner, I froze. The porch light was off, the curtains were missing, and a moving truck sat in the driveway, tailgate open, men tossing furniture inside like it was scrapwood. What the hell? My voice cracked as I dropped my bag and ran forward. One of the movers barely looked at me. You the tenant? Orders from the owners. House sold this morning. Everything's being cleared. My heart slammed so hard I couldn't breathe. Number, that's not possible. This is my house. My name is on the... Before I could finish, I heard laughter. Light, sharp, cutting through the night. I turned, and there she was. My sister Amanda, standing on the sidewalk with her arms crossed, smirk plastered on her perfect face. Well, she drawled, tilting her head like she was enjoying a private joke. I guess someone finally told you. I staggered toward her, every muscle in my body trembling. What did you do? Why is my house being emptied? Amanda didn't even blink. She leaned closer, her perfume hitting me like poison. Mom and Dad sold it, signed everything over to fund Kyle's trip to Europe. You know, something worthwhile. He deserved it more than you. Her words burned like acid. My brother, the golden boy, the one who never worked a day in his life, who flunked out of college twice, and still got praised for finding himself. And me, I'd been killing myself with double shifts, holding everything together. I felt my lips curve into a slow, sharp smile that didn't match the chaos in my chest. Amanda's brows lifted, confused. She thought she'd crushed me. She thought I'd beg, cry, maybe throw a scene. Instead, I just whispered, "Wait until you hear who really owned that land." The color drained from her face, because she didn't know. None of them knew. And that was the beginning of their undoing. Amanda's smirk only deepened when she saw the shock on my face. She folded her arms like she had won some prize. "Don't look so surprised, Riley," she said. "Kyle's future matters more than your little house. He deserved it more than you." Her words stabbed at me, but instead of breaking down, I forced myself to stay calm. My voice came out steady, sharper than I expected. Deserved it? He's never worked a day in his life. I've been pulling double shifts just to keep this place running, and you think selling it behind my back is fair? Amanda laughed. Fair? Life isn't fair. Mom and Dad finally did something right for once. The movers kept shuffling boxes, avoiding eye contact like they didn't want to get dragged into the family drama. I stepped closer, lowering my voice, but making sure she heard every syllable. "You think this house belonged to Mom and Dad to sell?" I asked. Amanda tilted her head, smirk still on her face. "Obviously. Who else would it belong to?" That's when I let the smallest smile tug at my lips. I leaned in, close enough for her to feel the sting of my words. "Wait until you hear who really owned that land." Her smirk faltered for the first time. "What are you talking about?" I pulled my phone out, swiping quickly to the scanned documents Grandma had given me months before. The official stamp glared back in the glow of the screen. "You should have paid attention before running your mouth, Amanda. Grandma didn't leave this land to Mom, Dad, or Kyle. She left it to me, legally recorded, witnessed, and sealed." Amanda's eyes darted to the movers, then back to me. Her confidence cracked just enough for me to see the fear she tried to hide. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" I said softly. "Tomorrow you'll see the proof. And when you do, that smirk of yours won't save you." For the first time all night, Amanda had nothing to say. The silence between us was heavier than any insult she'd thrown before. And standing there, tired, angry, and still in my grease-stained uniform, I realized something. I finally had the upper hand. The next morning, I barely slept. My uniform from the diner still hung on the back of the chair, carrying that faint smell of grease and burnt coffee I couldn't scrub off my skin. But I didn't care. My mind wasn't on double shifts or aching feet anymore. It was on the fireproof envelope sitting on the dresser, the one Grandma had insisted I keep safe. By 9:30 a.m., I was already downtown, the courthouse looming over the city like some concrete fortress. People rushed in and out, lawyers in sharp suits, clerks balancing files, a few nervous couples clutching paperwork. I stood there gripping the strap of my worn-out bag, my pulse drumming. At 9:59, they arrived. Amanda first, clicking down the sidewalk in heels too bright for the occasion, still pretending this was some kind of performance. Behind her came Mom and Dad, both dressed like they'd just walked out of a country club brunch. And, of course, Kyle trailed last, sleepy-eyed, yawning, sunglasses pushed up like the sunlight was personally attacking him. The moment he saw me, Kyle snorted. "Really, Riley? You dragged us all the way down here because you're jealous of a vacation?" I clenched my jaw. "Number, I dragged you here because you sold something you didn't own." Dad's lips pressed into a thin line. "Stop this nonsense. We handled it, Riley. The house was ours to sell. End of story." "Not quite," I said, pulling the envelope from my bag. My hands didn't even shake this time. I'd been waiting for this. "You sold the structure, sure, but the land, the deed to the actual soil, belongs to me. Grandma made sure of it." I laid the documents flat on the table inside the recorder's office. The clerk glanced at the raised seal, then at my parents. "This was recorded last December," she said matter-of-factly. "Valid and active. Leasehold interest, consent clause. Yes, she's correct. Any sale without the landowner's signature is unenforceable. Amanda's face drained of color. Mom stiffened, clutching her purse like someone had just told her it was fake. Dad's nostrils flared, but he didn't argue. The seal spoke louder than any excuse. Kyle blinked, confused. Wait, so what does that mean? The money? The clerk adjusted her glasses and read aloud. Any transfer made in violation of the consent clause shall result in the full net proceeds reverting to the landowner. She looked at me. That's you? The silence that followed was so heavy I could feel the weight of it pressing down on the room. Amanda whispered, "You're lying?" But her voice cracked halfway. "No," I said, steady as stone. "You sold the roof over my head, but Grandma made sure I'd always have the ground beneath my feet. That money you thought would send Kyle across Europe? It's mine now." Kyle's sunglasses slipped down his nose. "You've got to be kidding me." I turned to face all of them, my voice sharper now, carrying every sleepless night, every double shift, every insult they'd thrown at me. "You treated me like I was disposable, like my work didn't matter, like my life was less valuable than Kyle's endless vacations. But here's the truth. Grandma saw me. She trusted me. And now you'll see just how big of a mistake you made." For the first time in years, they weren't laughing, mocking, or sneering. They were silent, because the one thing they valued most, money, had slipped straight through their fingers into mine. And standing there, I realized something I never thought I'd feel around them. Power. The courthouse air still clung to my skin as I walked outside with the envelope pressed tight against my chest. The sun had burned through the morning haze, but my parents and siblings stood in the shadow of the building, their faces twisted with disbelief. Amanda was the first to break the silence. She stormed toward me, heels clicking against the pavement like gunshots. "You set this up, didn't you?" she hissed. "You and Grandma, plotting behind our backs. You knew about this all along." I met her glare without flinching. Of course I knew. That's why I didn't fall apart when I saw movers clearing my house last night. You thought I'd just roll over, but Grandma didn't raise me to be stupid. She raised me to survive you. Amanda's jaw tightened, but before she could spit out another insult, Mom's voice cracked through the tension. "How dare you embarrass us like that, Riley?" Her nails dug into the leather of her purse. "You stood there in front of a clerk and humiliated this family." I actually laughed, a sharp, bitter laugh that cut through her theatrics. "No, Mom. You humiliated yourselves when you forged ahead with a sale you didn't have the right to make. I didn't ruin your reputation. You did that the second you signed papers without understanding what you were signing." Dad finally stepped forward, face red, voice sharp. "You think you're clever, waving paperwork around like some kind of lawyer? Let me remind you, Riley, you wouldn't even have had that house if it weren't for us. We co-signed. We carried the risk." I squared my shoulders, meeting his glare head-on. "And Grandma made sure you couldn't touch it when it mattered most. She knew what you'd try to do. She knew you'd always put Kyle first. That's why she locked you out legally and gave me the ground beneath the house. She didn't trust you, and now you've proved her right." Kyle scoffed, tugging his sunglasses off and shoving them into his pocket. "So what, Riley? You've got the money now? Congratulations. You're still a waitress pulling double shifts. Do you really think owning some dirt makes you better than me?" I turned toward him, and this time, my voice wasn't just steady. It carried a weight even I hadn't felt before. "No, Kyle. What makes me better is that I work for what I have. I don't need Mom and Dad to rob other people to pay for my vacations. I don't need handouts. I've been surviving without your approval my whole life, and now I'll thrive without it." For a moment, his smug expression faltered. A few people on the courthouse steps had stopped to watch, their curious glances flicking between us. It wasn't a private argument anymore. It was a public unraveling. My family, so obsessed with appearances, was being stripped bare right in front of strangers. Amanda tugged on Mom's sleeve, whispering urgently. Mom nodded, then tried to soften her tone like she always did when she wanted to manipulate me. "Listen, Riley, you've made your point. But think about what you're doing. This money, it was supposed to give Kyle opportunities. Don't you want your brother to have a future? Isn't family more important than money?" My throat tightened, but not from doubt, from fury. "Family?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Family is what you use as a shield every time you betray me. Family didn't think twice about selling the roof over my head. Family laughed when I worked double shifts while Kyle slept in. Family told me I wasn't worth as much as a plane ticket to Europe. Don't stand there and lecture me about family when you've never treated me like part of one. The silence that followed was suffocating. I could see people whispering at the edge of the steps, their eyes wide. My parents hated gossip more than anything, and now they were the center of it. Amanda broke first, her voice sharp but shaky. "You'll regret this. You think you've won, but when the money runs out, you'll come crawling back. You always do." I stepped closer, so close she had to tilt her chin up to meet my eyes. "No, Amanda, the crawling stops today." Her lips parted, but no words came out. I turned and started walking down the courthouse steps, the envelope clutched tightly in my hand. Behind me, their voices rose, angry, panicked, desperate. But I didn't stop. Every step felt like a chain snapping off my back, years of humiliation and betrayal falling away. By the time I reached the sidewalk, my phone buzzed. A message from the escrow officer, funds released. Proceeds redirected to Heart Corner Land, LLC. I stopped in my tracks, staring at the words, my hands trembling. It was real. The money they thought was Kyle's was mine. All of it. For the first time in years, I smiled. Not out of spite, not out of bitterness, but out of sheer relief. They had taken everything they thought I had. But Grandma had given me something they could never steal. And now, I was finally free. The message from escrow lit up my screen like a beacon. Funds released. Proceeds redirected to Heart Corner Land, LLC. My hands tightened around the phone until I thought it might crack, but I couldn't let go. This was real. It wasn't a bluff, wasn't just some paperwork I waved in my family's face. It was mine. The very money they stole to fund Kyle's Playboy vacation was now sitting safely under my name. Behind me, I heard the shuffle of heels and the hurried breath of Amanda catching up. She grabbed my arm, nails digging into my sleeve. "You can't just take it all," she hissed, her face blotchy with panic. "That's not how family works." I yanked my arm free. "Don't you dare use the word family with me again." Mom and Dad were right behind her, their polished appearances unraveling by the second. Dad's face was red, his jaw tight, while Mom's lipstick smudged as she muttered desperate appeals. "Riley, think about this. Be reasonable. We can sit down, discuss a fair split." I spun on my heel, my voice slicing through her words. "Fair split? Where was the fair split when you signed my house away without even calling me? Where was the fair split when Amanda mocked me last? Night for working 2 jobs while Kyle partied? Number, you wanted all of it. Now you get nothing." Kyle, finally realizing the weight of it all, shoved his sunglasses back on, but his voice cracked when he spoke. "You don't need that money, Riley. You're just gonna waste it. You don't even know how to handle it." I stared at him for a long moment, then said softly, "Funny. That's exactly what Grandma used to say about you." His mouth fell open, but no words came. The tension around us had drawn a small crowd. Lawyers exiting the courthouse, strangers with coffee cups. They all lingered, curious. My family, who always valued appearances above all else, was now being exposed in broad daylight. Their humiliation wasn't just in losing the money, it was in losing the performance they'd worked so hard to maintain. I stepped forward, lowering my voice so only they could hear. "Do you know what this really is? Justice. For every time you called me less. For every night I came home from work and found you throwing parties with the lights I paid for. For every sigh, every sneer, every reminder that Kyle was the golden child and I was the burden. Justice doesn't always come loud. Sometimes it comes on embossed paper with a seal. And sometimes," I lifted the envelope slightly, "it comes with a bank transfer." Amanda's eyes filled with something I'd never seen in her before. Not just anger, but fear. Mom pressed her lips together, and Dad, for the first time, looked like he might break. I turned away before they could see the tears burning the edges of my own vision. They would never understand that I hadn't wanted revenge. What I wanted was respect. What I wanted was to matter. And thanks to Grandma, I finally had something they couldn't take away. As I walked down the block, my phone buzzed again. A message from the bank app confirmed the transfer. 6 figures, clean, secured. My legs almost gave out beneath me, but I kept walking, step by step until the courthouse was behind me. I stopped at the diner on the corner, the same one where I'd spent countless nights pouring coffee for strangers who barely looked at me. For once, I I didn't walk in as the tired waitress. I walked in as someone who had taken back her life. Sliding into a booth, I set the envelope beside me and finally let myself exhale. For years, I thought survival meant enduring whatever scraps my family threw at me. But now I knew survival was more than that. It was standing up. It was refusing to be their punching bag. It was holding the ground beneath my feet and saying, no more. And as I sipped a cup of coffee that I didn't have to serve, I smiled. Because for the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was winning.